Hello and welcome to Facts Webinar, Silvopasture for Pigs. Our guest is Austin Unruh with Trees for Graziers. I'm Catherine Hoke, Facts Humane Farming Program Associate, and I'll be moderating this session. Thanks so much for joining us. If you're not familiar, Food Animal Concerns Trust, or FACT, is a national nonprofit organization that works to ensure that all food-producing animals are raised in a humane and healthy manner. We accomplish this by supporting humane farmers through our humane farming program, promoting policies that make foods from animals safe and healthy to eat through our Safe and Healthy Foods program, and generally help consumers make informed food choices. Please visit our website at foodanimalconcernstrust.org to learn more about all our farmer services. I'd also like to thank my wonderful colleague Katie Mead, who is joining us to help field questions and take over in case anything goes wrong with my internet, but fingers crossed. All right, at this time, I'm delighted to introduce our presenter, Austin Unruh with Trees for Graziers. You may recognize him from his fabulous webinars he's done with us in the past. Austin is the founder and CEO of Trees for Graziers, a company helping farmers in Pennsylvania and beyond take their grazing to new heights using silvopasture. It's his goal to make silvopasture as easy and cost-effective as possible for farmers, which is why TFG offers everything from planning and funding, acquisition to planting and aftercare, while also growing silvo-specific nursery stock. When not thinking about silvopasture, Austin's favorite activity is picking all manner of tree crops with his young family. We're super lucky to have Austin back with us. Without further ado, I'll turn the floor over to you, Austin, so you can begin your presentation.
Thank you, Catherine, very much for the introduction. I'm happy to be here and happy to share with you all, especially as I've been learning more and more about tree crops for pigs in particular. And I have some more things to share. It's going to be similar in some ways to silvopasture for poultry because there's a lot of similarities between poultry and hogs, but there's so much more that we can do with hogs and a lot of opportunities there. So without further ado, I am going to share my screen. Okay. So here we go. Okay. So as Catherine said, my name is Austin Unruh, and I started and run Trees for Graziers. So we're based in southeastern Pennsylvania, and our goal is to make it as easy as possible for people to add trees to their pastures. So there's two ways to get a silvopasture. One is to thin a woods, and the other one is to plant trees into pasture. And most of our experience is with planting trees into pastures. And that's largely because of the area that we are in. Most of our area is pretty wide open pastures, and we need shade. We don't have a lot of woods. Land in our area goes for $30,000 to $50,000 an acre or more, depending on where you're at. And we have a lot of smaller Amish dairies. That's the context that we have kind of honed our work in. And so most of our work has been with ruminants, and mostly beef and dairy cattle. But as we get into other areas, we're starting to work with more pigs and poultry. And there's when I look at silvopasture, I think that the the easiest thing to scale, the most scalable form of silvopasture is planting trees for ruminants, right? Because there's already millions and millions of acres that are currently supporting grass-fed beef in general, whether it's grass-fed, grass-finished beef, or just cow-calf operations. There's millions of acres here in the eastern half of the United States that can easily support trees, where it would be fairly easy to add trees for shade and have additional feed dropping from those trees for those beef cattle in particular, as well as for dairies. Um, Now, that's the easiest to scale, but the thing that I believe has the most opportunity to change the game, change the way that things are done, is silvopasture for pigs and for poultry. Just because the way that we're doing pastured poultry and pastured pigs right now is we're coming up short. And that's what we're going to be talking about here today, is there's a lot more to be done there. And I firmly believe that by integrating tree crops into these systems, that we're able to completely transform the way that pastured pigs and pastured poultry are done in the United States, and that that can serve our small farms very, very well by being able to create high quality animal products with really, really high quality of animal welfare, while also reducing the cost of production for farmers and raising the profit margins for farmers as well. So I see this as something that could really, really transform the way that that pigs and poultry are raised on pasture, and also can make more money per acre than integration of trees for ruminants alone. So let's get into it here. So let's start off with a what is our current baseline, and it's not a pretty one if you care about pigs and animal welfare, right? So as of right now, roughly 2% of pigs are raised outside of CAFO. So 98% of pigs start their life just like this, and they finish their life in a building just like this. And of those 2% that are raised outside of the CAFO system, you all know as well as I do that most of those are not raised on pasture, right? Maybe a lot of those are in dirt lots or inside barns. They still have maybe a deep bedding, but it's still not finished on acorns in the woods the way that a hog would like to be. And at the same time, that's not the case for beef cattle. So in beef cattle, we have a very different context where almost all beef cattle, with very few exceptions, spend the majority of their lives out on pasture. And they only go to feedlots for the last portion of their lives to be fattened. So right there is a kind of a dichotomy, and the question that it inspired inside of me was, why has pastured pork lagged so far behind grass-fed beef? So in the last 20, 30 years, we've seen a real progression with a lot of people turning towards grass-fed, grass-finished beef. It's still a relatively small percentage of the amount of beef that's consumed here in the United States, but even then, like we saw earlier, most all beef animals are raised on pasture, or start the majority of their lives on pasture. So why is it that that's the case for beef and that's not the case for pigs at all? And those are very, very completely different systems. So I think the a large portion of the answer, it's a complex thing. There are many different factors, but a large portion of it is that we have the habitat that is needed to grow low input and inexpensive beef and other ruminants on pasture. And we don't have that habitat, or we have very little of that habitat that is suited to pigs in particular, right? So if you can let livestock out to an area where they can fend for themselves, you don't have to feed them, you don't have to move their manure, you don't have to buy the inputs. All of those things, if you can create that kind of a context where the animals are able to take care of themselves without you having to put much money and effort and labor into this, you can create a product that is fairly low cost. And that's what beef is, right? Like that's what the beef industry does, is you have, whether it's ranches or in the eastern United States, it's more the back 40 cow-calf operation. Um, Either way, they're low input systems where you have almost free food available for those livestock for a large portion of the year, even if you are supplementing with hay or with grain during certain times. So the superpower of ruminants is that they are able to convert relatively low quality, otherwise unusable, high fiber forages into meat and into milk and whatever else that they're creating. So that really is their superpower. And in certain contexts, that's the main type of food that is available. Think the American prairie, or in the eastern United States, the rolling hills and grasslands or and pastures that we have. But that's not what we had here forever. That is a more recent development, as we'll get into in just a little bit. So, monogastrics, meanwhile, so livestock that only have one stomach, so your pigs and your poultry, they need high quality, low fiber, and easily digested feeds, right? And in natural systems, they would find these in the form of fruits, nuts, grass seeds, and grains, as well as insects and grubs and tubers and all kinds of other things. So that's the kind of food that they need because they don't have those multi-chambered stomachs that can digest and break down forages. They will eat some forages, but it's not going to be the majority of their diet. So they need those kind of inputs. They need those higher quality feeds. And at the moment, we have a lot more grass than we do tree crops. Then we have these high quality feeds other than corn and soy. And we've gotten really, really good at growing corn and soybeans over the last 100 or so years, and very efficient. We've been able to drive the cost down of that very significantly. And so, because we have this context of plentiful grasses for ruminants, those are simple, low input systems, and we don't have contexts where we have a lot of tree crops available. What we do instead is we've gotten really good at efficiently controlling the process for pigs and poultry, where because they're not having to go out there and roam and get their own feed. We're able to confine them in really small spaces, and we control everything about their whole lives. And we bring the corn and soybeans to them, and they don't have to see the light of day. They don't have to be outside, any of that stuff. So that is, in a nutshell, why this system is the way it is, why it's so very different for beef cattle as it is for pigs. And so when over the last, let's say 20, 30 years, as there's been more of a push to bring livestock back onto pasture, that has worked a lot better for ruminants than it has for monogastrics, right? We work with a lot of folks who are in the grass-fed milk business, where everything is grass-based, and there's a whole bunch of producers that do grass-fed beef and lamb and goat. Obviously, both of those are very significant. A large portion of those markets are completely grass-fed. They're low input systems. That's not been the case for pastured pigs and poultry, right? So anyone who has raised them on pasture is familiar with the fact that most of their feed still comes from grains, unless you're running like pigs in the woods. Most of their feed is still coming from grains. It's supplemented by forages, and hopefully you're able to supplement with a fairly substantial portion of forages, as well as grubs and insects. But the majority of feed tends to come from grains, and we don't tend to have a competitive advantage or enough of a competitive advantage when raising pork on pasture compared to those folks raising them in a CAFO. Because think about it, in a CAFO you have very low labor costs per animal because you're squeezing so many animals in there, and we've automated so much, automated, mechanized, and we're able to be very efficient labor wise in a CAFO. You're buying grain at huge quantities, and so you're going to get the very best price on the feed. Compare that to someone raising a couple hogs, or even a couple dozen, or a couple hundred hogs. Even at a couple hundred, you're not going to compare in the buying power to someone who's raising thousands, tens of thousands of hogs every year. Um, so the labor is going to be more expensive on pasture. The bought in feed is going to be more expensive as well. There's some of that feed is going to be offset by the forages, but probably not enough, because your pigs are also going to be on pasture. They're going to have more environmental factors. They're probably going to need to burn a little bit more energy to either stay warm or to cool off. They're going to be moving around more, which is going to burn calories. And that's what we want. We want them to be able to move around and we want them to be able to be active. But that's one of the things that folks in CAFOs look for is they don't want their animals to move around. They don't want them to burn calories. They want them to be as efficient as possible in turning grain into meat. Um, so we're really not gaining a whole lot of feed savings, even though they're out on pasture and they are consuming forages. And unfortunately, it hasn't been the case that the animal welfare premium that you're able to get makes up enough for some of these competitive disadvantages in pastured systems. So one of the things that I've been reading lately, and I highly recommend this, is the book Lesser Beasts by the author Mark Essig. I think it came out in about 2015. And Lesser Beasts does a fantastic job of laying out the history of hogs and their interactions with humans, going from the time of domestication all the way through today. And one of the things that stands out in that history of hogs is that there was a time when pasture raised and even more forest grown, chestnut finished, acorn finished hogs were the standard. Not only the standard for hogs, but they were more common for several hundred years than even beef, more common than chicken, more common than lamb. So it was the most common meat, and also the most inexpensive meat in the United States for hundreds of years. And that recognition kind of blew my mind. I think I knew it to some degree because when you think about it, it makes sense. Um, but it kind of blew my mind when you're so used to the current context, when the idea of an acorn finished or chestnut finished hog, it brings to mind Iberian hams that go for $100 a pound, and you think that this must be the most expensive way to raise hogs. And in fact, in a different context, if you have the right system, you're able to raise hogs in a very low input, very inexpensive way. So let's go back to the 1700s, the 1800s, and think of the United States at that point. At that point, this was a relatively low population country, a lot fewer people than we have today. There wasn't near as much infrastructure. A lot less land was developed at that point, whether for pasture or whether for crops. You just had a lot more wilderness as well and woods. And in those woods, they were full of American chestnuts. This was before the American chestnut blight. You also had a lot of oaks and hickories. And think about how throughout a large portion of the United States, this had been an oak savanna that had been managed by Native Americans to create this open landscape with oaks, and using fire to manage for oaks and hickories and other trees that would produce mast. So imagine starting with that. And then over time, a lot of that land, as fire was no longer used, a lot of that land would have grown up into forests, and so you had this context of these oak, chestnut, hickory forests that were just full of masting trees that were going to drop tons of feed every fall. They weren't great for cattle. Cattle obviously could get some sustenance out of them, but they weren't open pastures. And they were no longer silvopasture either because they weren't being managed through fire for those savanna ecosystems. So really, these were forests that were just producing tons of mast, and the best way to use that was through hogs. And at that point, we had what was called fence out laws, right? So if you had crops, if you had a field of corn, and a hog got into there, that was your responsibility as the owner of that field of corn, because your responsibility was to fence hogs or cows or whatever it was out of your field, rather than the responsibility of the person who was raising the hogs to fence them in. And that just completely changes the scenario, because it allowed people to have a couple hogs, a couple dozen hogs, and let them more or less run loose, and they would notch their ears, or brand them to determine whose hogs were whose, and they would provide a little bit of care for them. And then in the fall, after they've fattened, or whenever they wanted to be able to have a hog roast or sell a hog, they would call them in or they would trap them. And there you had it. Like, it was a very, very low input system, very low labor, and they had the means of production was right there. And even if it took a year or 2 years for the hog to get to weight, it didn't hardly cost the producer anything, because of that bountiful amount of land that was common, that where livestock were able to freely roam, and you didn't have to provide the feed for them, essentially. And also during that time period, uh, pork, and this was before refrigeration. So pork was the meat that lasted the best, or was, and also tasted the best when it was cured. Like beef and sheep gets really leathery if you cure it, whereas pork still it tastes good. It has good consistency because it's fat. Um, there was a really high demand for cured pork, because that was just the easiest thing for people to have on hand. So the demand for that was high. The demand for lard was also high, before they had a lot of alternatives to lard. So obviously we don't have that kind of context anymore, and there's a number of factors for it. A big one is the chestnut blight, right? So we had the chestnut blight come through in the early 1900s, and it wiped out just huge amounts of these trees, which in many areas accounted for a quarter or more of the canopy. And these were reliable producers that dropped a tremendous amount of high calorie, high carbohydrate tree crops for hogs and also for human consumption. So there's a lot of people throughout Appalachia that they relied on the chestnuts for their own consumption, for the sale of chestnuts themselves, and then for the consumption or for the feeding of hogs. So it's probably hard to understate the value of the American chestnuts and how significant the loss of those chestnuts was. There was also a move to uh, to move from a fence out regulation to a fence in requirement, so that people had to fence their livestock, whether that's cattle or hogs, in. And part of that makes sense as you get more farmland and you have more people, more, and as you had highways go in and roads, you don't want hogs running across roads and cattle running across roads. One of the other of the factors, though, was that especially in the South, when you had slavery, uh, slave owners wanted their slaves to be able to feed themselves, and so that they didn't have to pay for their food, right? And so they were fine with their slaves allowing hogs to run loose, or gathering chestnuts in the woods or whatever it was. But once slavery officially ended and you had sharecroppers, landowners figured out that if people could, and the poor in particular, if they could get their sustenance on from the land for free, that they would have very little incentive to work for them. And so that was a large portion of it too, that um, the areas that had the most slavery previously and now the most sharecroppers, that those were the first counties to start to require that livestock be fenced in, and that they started to enforce property boundaries and did not allow people to come onto property that was not their own. So that even if there was chestnuts on the ground, if you entered that property, you could face very significant retaliation for that. Um, you also just had kind of the end of a lot of these oak savannas. So as these oak savannas had had several hundred years at that point of not having fire regimes, you had other trees coming up that weren't as good for mast. We also got a lot better at growing cheap grain over the last 100 years. A lot less labor went into it, and we're able to produce a whole lot more per acre of grain than we could 100 years ago. And another factor is that the demand for lard really declined in the first half of the 20th century, and even over the last 100 years, we've had ups and downs in terms of the public interest for lard. So that's a huge factor with the onset of like petroleum products that were used for industrial lubricants, and then as well bringing in vegetable-based oils instead of lard. So those are some of the factors. I'm sure there's other ones, but those are some of the key factors in switching the context from what we had then to the context that we have now. So, our current status for pastured pork, some of the problems that we have is that pastures alone do not provide a whole lot of food for pigs, right? They provide a supplement, and raising pigs on pasture is so much better for the animal welfare, but they do not provide a whole lot of feed for pigs. Even if you have access to the woods where you have shade, you have natural places for pigs to root, and you have mast, and depending on what you have, if you have a whole bunch of maple trees, that's not going to do a whole lot for you. But if you happen to have oaks and hickories, that's going to be a great fit. But even then, those are only dropping their nuts in the fall. So right now is a great time for it, but how about during the early spring and during the summer? There's not a whole lot available for them. And if we think to other systems around the world, we think to Spain and to Portugal, even the famed Dehesa silvopasture system, which is well known for producing this Iberian ham, it's limited because they rely so much on the oaks. And as we know, oaks cycle in their mast years. So some years they have a lot, some years that they don't have a lot, and they're only dropping for a certain amount of time. So that's an improvement over what we have currently in most of our pastures, but it's still not what could be because of that pretty severe limitation. Um, so what I propose as solutions to this is we can actually go out there and we can create these custom built systems that that take the baseline of a pasture, and then we add trees onto that, and we can add trees just for shade, and we can call it good, or we can add trees that are going to produce shade as well as a whole suite of other tree crops that are there to feed livestock, whether it's ruminants or whether it's monogastrics, your pigs and your poultry. So this is the kind of system that we can create. Now, it's going to take a while. This is not going to be something that's going to change overnight. But the upside of it is that we have kind of a blank canvas to work from. And we are able to pick the right trees to put in the right places, that we're able to cover a large portion of the drop season for pigs, and provide a lot of the feed that they need for probably 8, 9 months out of the year. Um, so this really, I think, is what's going to be the difference maker to take what we currently have of where we don't have a lot of competitive advantages in pasture raised pigs, to creating a system that could actually become a very low input system where so much of their feed is taken care of out on pasture. So what does this look like? So in broad strokes, and because we don't have forever to lay this out, um, simply what it's going to look like is you want to have all of your seasons covered that you can cover. The spring is going to be hard. There's not a whole lot of things dropping during the spring. Mostly you're going to be leaning on forages, and that's probably the season where feeding grain makes the most sense. But during the summer, mulberries are really the number one, both their fruit and their leaves. Mulberries are high in protein. Both the fruit and the leaves are. We've had mulberry fruits tested. We've only had two cultivars tested so far, but one came back with 12% protein in the fruit, and the other one came back with 18% protein in the fruit. And we want to do a lot more testing in the years ahead to really figure out which cultivars are high, which ones are low, what other factors are a difference maker. So mulberries are probably the most important, most valuable tree crop when it comes to feeding hogs because they're dropping early in the season before anything else is dropping. They're also really hardy trees. They grow fast. They produce a ton of fruit, as we'll get into in just a little bit. Plums are another option, as well as early apples. So, like your early transparent apples that are going to drop in as soon as July, August, are also interesting options for that summer window. Um, Fall is really when we have a ton of options. We're kind of spoiled for options during the fall. So you have apples, pears, persimmons, chestnuts, acorns, hickories, hazelnuts, pecans, and it's a longer list than that. And that's when most of the trees are going to be making their fruit or their nuts available. Um, and then during the winter, you want to be looking for things that last longer on the ground or in the tree. So red oaks with their acorns and red oaks have higher tannins, and everyone who like hunts, they think of white oaks as something that's preferable, which in some ways it is because white oak acorns tend to have lower tannins. But the beauty of red oaks is that the tannins are there to make them last longer on the ground. So it's a preservative. So if you have a bunch of red oaks and those red oaks stay good on the ground for longer, they're going to last into winter and stay in good condition because the strategy of those trees is we're going to drop our acorns and white oaks they germinate right away, and red oaks will tend to germinate in the spring, so they need to have higher tannins so that they last and stay in good condition over the winter time. So that's an interesting option to be able to offer for to be able to build into these systems. Honey locust pods are mostly going to provide energy, but the beauty of them is that they do last a really long time and they hold up very well. Late dropping persimmons and late dropping apples are both interesting options for extending the season. Um, in this, I think it's really important that as we look to recreate these kind of systems, low input tree-based systems, that we will have to rethink a lot of what we currently do, and draw a lot of lessons from how people have raised pigs in the natural world, in with natural systems for thousands of years. So we'll have to do a lot of looking back to see what made sense for them. How did it make sense when you're having to go with the flow of the natural seasons? So I think spring farrowing makes a lot of sense, um, and having most of your production during the growing season so that you're able to maximize your utilization of mulberries and chestnuts and hazelnuts and all of the things that are growing for free under pasture, and you have as little dependency as possible on having to feed grain. And there's going to be a whole lot of things that we're going to have to relearn, but thankfully people have been doing this for thousands of years. So there is a lot to learn from, so long as we are willing to dig into our history books. Um, One of the best resources on this topic that illuminates to a degree the value of tree crops for pigs is the book Tree Crops by J. Russell Smith. I would highly recommend it to anyone who's interested in feeding uh, pigs and poultry on tree crops. Um, because so tree crops, the story there goes that J. Russell Smith traveled around the world and around the country looking for different examples of how people were raising livestock, using livestock, raising livestock using tree crops, but then also using tree crops to feed themselves. Um, and so he has quite a few things to share from especially his travels throughout the southern parts of the United States, where this was common practice. So I'm just going to read this for everyone that all throughout the southern United States, mulberries are commonly used as feed for pigs and poultry. In North and South Carolina and Georgia, nearly every pig lot is planted with these trees, and the mulberries form a very important addition to the pig's diet. So if that was the case back in the day when people were not getting any kind of premium for pasture raised pigs or acorn finished or chestnut finished pigs, that should be even more so the case now when there is a significant premium to be had for these. I'm just going to read a couple others because I think they illuminate the really significant amount of feed and reduced cost that we're looking at. This is not just a garnish, right? If you do these systems well, these are real economic drivers. So, Mr. James C. Moore, farmer of Auburn, Alabama, writes, I never weighed my pigs at the beginning and the close of the mulberry season, but I think I can safely say that a pig weighing 100 pounds at the start would weigh 200 pounds at the close. Three-fourths to the mulberries is a safe calculation of the gain. I have had the patch about 18 years bearing. I planted my trees just 32 feet apart, and now the branches are meeting. And I have about 40 trees. I've carried 30 head of hogs from May 1st to August 1st with no food but the gleanings of the barn and what slops came from the kitchen of a small family. And if you do the math on this system, that works out to just about 1 acre. And if those hogs are gaining 75 pounds and you have 30 of them, that's 2,250 pounds of live weight gain on an acre, or 56 pounds of live weight gain for every tree in this system. That's pretty amazing. I've talked to several folks, including CJ, who's on the call right here on the webinar, and he was telling me for them it costs them about $1 per pound of gain. And so if you were to have the opportunity to invest in a tree that was going to give you $56 worth of feed every single year once it got to maturity, that's a fantastic return on investment. So here's another one. This one is a little bit more conservative yet. Oh, hold on one second. This one is a little bit more conservative yet, and I think it's useful to set kind of a baseline in this case. So Mr. R.H. Ricks, a farmer specializing in cottonseed at Rocky Mount, North Carolina, gives the following testimony. I planted 200 mulberry trees of the everbearing variety 33 years ago on what I regarded as waste land. They commenced having some fruit at once, but they did not have a profitable crop until the 5th year. I have since planted another orchard of 50 trees. I carry 50 to 60 hogs on the fruit 10 to 13 weeks every year for the last 27 years without other food. And in the main bearing season, the 250 trees would carry twice the number of hogs. Nearly every farmer has a small orchard in this section of eastern North Carolina. I regard the mulberry for hog food with much favor. So if we look at the economics of this, if we're talking 75 head times 80 days, so about 11-ish weeks, a little over 11 weeks, and a little bit more than the 50 to 60 head that he talks about, if we're assuming that during the peak of the planting of the drop season that he could support twice that many. So we're talking about 6,000 days roughly of hog feed from this, or 24 days of hog feed per tree. And again, this was on wasteland, so not your high quality ag land. So what this does for me is even though we don't have like university studies that tell you exactly how many pounds of mulberries we're dropping or they were out there weighing every single pig, we don't have those, at least not yet. I hope to have those in the coming years. But we have several farmers who obviously know what they're doing and you know what they're talking about. They know when they were planted, they know how many trees they've planted, they know how many hogs that they've run, and they've been able to do this for decades. And so these testimonies to me speak volumes about what these trees can actually do. And notice that they're mostly talking about mulberries, and that's most of what when you look for information on hogs, that's most of what you're going to find in the book Tree Crops is on mulberries, because if you have a context where you already have oaks and you have chestnuts and you have all these other things out in the woods already, the thing that's lacking the most is mulberries. So that's why people were planting the mulberries for their hogs so that they could address that time frame. Okay, so Now that we've gotten all of that and kind of the big picture vision of what we want to create, how do we get these trees established in a pasture, right? So here's are the basis of our establishment methods. So, and most of our work has happened in the context of ruminants, dairy, and beef cattle is most of our work so far. So we're just getting into the pastured hog side of things. And the easiest thing is if you don't have to have your hogs in the pasture while the trees are getting established, if you can keep them out, that's the easiest because it's it's hard enough to keep trees protected from just one type of animal. And then when you have different types of animals, maybe cattle and hogs and chickens, like they're all going after different parts of the tree. So it gets more complicated, more challenging to protect the trees that way. So the more that we can just protect the trees from, let's say you have a grass-fed beef operation and then you want to add trees for hogs, just keep the hogs out for a couple of years until the trees are actually producing for them. What we use as our basis for our methodology is a 6 foot tall planter tree tube, fiberglass stake, and a plastic tube. And both of those are electrical insulators. So we're able to wrap electric wire around these tubes to keep livestock off of the tubes. So the tube provides protection from browsing for the tree, and the electric fencing protects the tree tube itself from livestock rubbing up on it. And then we also put a heavy mulch around the base of the tree. Again, a reason that if you can keep the pigs out or keep poultry out, like both of them would love to get into that kind of a mulch. But that's the best watering that you can do, the best jump start that you can give the tree is just providing that means of reducing water stress, of reducing the amount of competition that the tree has around it, and you're also creating a more fungal environment, uh, fungal microbiology in the soil right there for your tree. One of the systems that we've developed for protecting these tree tubes is what we call the overpass. So you can run your poly wire at like waist height, however you would normally set up a paddock division. That's one way to do it. But then livestock aren't able to move through that row of poly wire. So a different way that we've done it, and we've ended up doing a lot more of this lately, is what we call the overpass. So we run a strand of aluminum wire, poly wire at the top. Um, and we pop a hole in the very top of the tube, an extra one, and we put a wire through there, like a twist tie, and so we run the poly wire through there, and then we wrap an aluminum wire around the tree tube itself. So that way livestock can freely move underneath that wire. They can move throughout rows, and then you can set up your paddocks as large or small as you want them to. Again, mulch is essential for reducing water stress for your trees. What we typically do is about 10 gallons, so like 2 5-gallon buckets worth. We also know that a lot of pastures have a lot of habitat for voles and other rodents, and those can really do a lot of damage on trees. So we make sure to add a vole guard. Typically, what we do is what we're using at this point is the right one there. It's the black mesh. It's just we put it right around the base of the tree so that the voles or other rodents can't get right to the base of the tree and girdle that. So what we've found is and particularly during the winter. So what we do is we have one of these vole guards, and then we'll add a vole deterrent as well, and that's usually castor oil and blood meal mix. So this is what one of my buddies has come up with, where he has his trees in an actively grazed hog pasture. And so far, like th that picture was taken after the hogs had been in there for about a week, and they had not touched those trees at all. So he used like a modified overpass system, and then he had these 3 posts on the outside. In this case, he was using sucker rods, but you wouldn't have to use something that quite that big. And it was just what he had available. And that way he was able to keep the tree tube itself protected as well as the mulch, so that they weren't rooting up the mulch. So that's one way. If you do have hogs already and you want to get trees established in that area, it's absolutely a possibility. It's just going to take a little bit more work and a little bit more cost to set something like that up. So, what are the first steps in making this kind of a system happen? So what I recommend to everyone is to start small and start now. Get some experience underneath your belt, and then you'll be able to learn a whole lot from that experience on how to get trees established on your property. I would recommend working with those trees that are going to give you the fastest return on investment. So start with mulberries rather than oaks, because oaks are going to take you a long time in order to get to production. We want to have oaks, we want to have chestnuts, we want to have those other tree crops, hickories, but it's probably most important to get those trees out there that are going to yield the fastest and are going to give us some kind of return on our investment to start with. Um, and then continue to add these trees steadily. I don't recommend that people jump in and do their whole farm all at once. I want you to take bite-sized chunks of the farm and do this steadily over the course of several years, because you're going to learn so much every new year. And if you jump in and do all of it at once, you're going to say, boy, I wish I had done this differently, but now those trees are already there. Um, so we, I'll share a little bit more about what we do at Trees for Grazers. So we can help people with planning, and we have a consulting staff. So if you go to our website, treesforgrazers.com, there's a whole bunch of resources there, including on hogs, on mulberries, on all kinds of things. And there's also information on how to sign up to work with us if you're interested in that and interested in developing a silvopasture plan. And we have several people on our team who have significant experience working with hogs and with poultry and creating silvopasture systems around those. So we do that. We help people find funding. Currently, that's a little bit more challenging than it was a year ago, given the current state of federal funding in general for conservation practices. We also have a nursery. So right now we have mulberries, especially. We have mulberries, poplars, and willows for sale in our nursery. So again, that's available at treesforgrazers.com. And this year, like that picture that you just saw, we've got mulberry trees that are 8 foot tall. And we're pretty excited about that, about being able to have high quality, all clonally propagated trees that are twice as tall as anything else that you're going to find through online nurseries. And if you buy in enough quantity, they're half the price of what you find on any online nurseries. And so our goal really is to make this available at the kind of scale and the kind of price that farmers need in order to make this accessible and really be able to do this at a scale that changes the game, at a scale that changes the way that we can actually make raising hogs on a silvopasture possible here in the United States. And then for folks who are close to us, so southeastern Pennsylvania, maybe into Maryland, we can also do planting, and we can take care of the trees after they've been planted. And then we do trainings as well for folks who want to get more service providers in an area trained on how to work with folks in their area to do silvopasture, because we can't do all of it. We mostly are able to serve folks in southeastern Pennsylvania, and we want to see more service providers out there being able to do this for farmers in their area and make it as easy as possible for farmers in their region to adopt silvopasture. So with that, that wraps up my presentation, and then I'm happy to hand it back over.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Austin. That was a great presentation. So if you have questions, go ahead. I see we have a few already in the Q&A, but just take a moment to get your questions in there. And in the meantime, I'm going to run a short poll, just a couple of questions that really helps us, especially when we're looking to get funding to keep these webinars free. So if you'll answer the few questions, we'd really appreciate that. That is if I can open it. There we are. Also, just want to give a quick plug that our Fund to Farmer grants open applications open next month. If you're considering a silvopasture system and you're looking for funding to do something like that, that is the kind of project we like to fund. So just think about that. And I'll say this again later, but we have our next webinar is going to be our getting funded webinar, talking all about our grants. So if that's something you're interested in, keep an eye out for that email. All right, let's get started with these questions. First question is, are pigs compatible with sheep for silvopasture? I'm assuming running them both in the pasture at the same time.
I would imagine so, but I am not an animal expert myself. I don't personally have pigs or sheep. Um, So I would not be the best person to answer that. They're going to be using different resources in a silvopasture, right? So your sheep are mostly going to be using your grasses, your forbs, and then your pigs are mostly going to be using your mast, as well as legumes and that kind of thing.
Yep. Would you recommend black walnuts?
Black walnuts, yes, I think black walnuts definitely have a place in a hog silvopasture. Particularly as a medicinal tree crop. So not so much as something that's really going to make up a large portion of their diet. I do know that from several people who have told me this that more mature animals can break those walnuts apart, and it sounds like a gun going off. That just the force that's required to break through those shells. Um, but particularly as a dewormer, they're very interesting for that. So I would probably sprinkle in a small amount of walnuts if you don't already have them coming up on your property.
All right. Let's see. Our next question is, what type of mulch are you using?
For mulch, we really just use wood chips, and that's something that we can get pretty easily around here. And I would recommend hardwood wood chips over like pine. If you're able to get hardwood, that would be the preferable kind.
Um, I know you just said not an animal expert, but what breeds of hogs are the easiest to keep in these systems? Do you have any thoughts
Yeah,
on that?
I'm gonna punt to someone else who has more experience than I do in this one.
If Sam were here, I bet she'd have thoughts. Sorry,
Yep.
guys. Okay, this next question, where are you sending the mulberries tested? I don't.
Oh, you know what? Yeah, to get those mulberries tested, we have like a dairy forage testing lab in our area because we have so many dairies. So I just brought it to them, and they looked at me very strange because they had never seen anyone come in with mulberries, as well as gummy berries. So for me, it was just a local lab. I think it was Dairyland Labs was the company that I brought them to, but I don't know if there's any reason to use them over someone else.
This next question. I noticed the Trees for Grazers website isn't opening to the product section.
Oh, well,
I don't
that's
know what the issue is with that. Um,
maybe there's just so much traffic going into it that we're crashing.
our next question from Chelsea is, can you get mulberry trees to grow in the woods?
Tree mulberries tend to be more of an open sun, like they want full sun. Um, so that's going to be harder to do in the woods. Really, they're going to want an open spot. And you're right. I'm having trouble with our website. Sometimes our website it gets a little bit buggy, so I would say just come back in a little bit. And the other thing too is, um, if you like, the best way to stay in touch and stay up to date with things is through our newsletter. I promise we will not spam you. We do not send out nearly as much stuff as we should. But that's the best way to stay up to date when we do release trees and that kind of thing.
Awesome. We have a couple more mulberry specific questions. One being,
Hmm.
when do mulberries fruit, which is dependent on where you're located, I guess.
Hmm.
And will other livestock like cattle and sheep eat mulberries?
Yeah, so I think cattle and sheep probably will eat mulberries. The challenge is probably going to be the size of them. I think cattle are going to have a harder time really picking them up than sheep, and goats should be able to do it fairly well because they tend to be fairly small. As far as the drop time is concerned, so I've talked to folks in Georgia who see mulberries dropping in April already, like later April. In our area, I figure June 1st is about when they start to drop. And if you're further north, like there's a tree in North Dakota that drops like in July through September, but I think that's mostly because it's that much colder for longer in North Dakota. So it really depends on what time or what area that you live in. But you tend to have a drop window of some trees will drop for several weeks, and then there are everbearing cultivars that will drop for several months. Right now, we have a dwarf everbearing tree that is I have fruits on it right now, like ripe fruits on it right now in October 7th, which I was very surprised about. It did most of its yielding in the early summer, then it took a little bit of a break, and then it decided to put a little bit extra fruit on in October.
We've got quite a few mulberry specific questions, and I think I remember you saying that you have a page on your website that goes in more
Mhm.
depth about mulberries.
We do. We have several articles that go
Okay.
into some depth on
If you
mulberries.
could email those to me and then we'll send that
Mhm.
out in the follow-up email just because I don't want to get too hyper focused in on the
Yep, you bet.
mulberries. We've got a few more questions. Austin, are you okay to stay about 5 more minutes? We're right about at 2, but we have
Perfectly happy to do that.
okay, great. Thank you. Are there any trees that you would recommend people stay away from?
Ooh, good question. Pawpaws is actually one that I haven't heard good things about them with pigs. There's probably some context where they can be, but I have heard stories of people feeding pawpaws to pigs, and so in one case, someone had a whole bunch of extra pawpaws. They brought them to a neighbor farmer, and he threw them to the pigs. The adults did not eat the pawpaws. The young ones did, and he lost quite a few of his younger pigs. And I think that's associated with the skin of the pawpaws. Like I eat pawpaws all the time. Like right, it's the end of pawpaw season right now, and I've eaten dozens. But for whatever reason, that was a significant issue in that case. So that's one I would be very cautious about. Um, I can't think of any other in particular that I would try to avoid.
That is good to know. Um, I love pawpaws.
Oh,
Such a good tree to have around, but maybe
hmm.
not in this context.
Yeah.
Um, what
And it
else?
may have just been one of those things where there was too much in too short of a time, and they'd never had them before. That's always a thing to watch out for is if you have too quick of an integration of something new, that can cause issues. But yeah, that story gave me significant pause.
Do you have any advice about going from woodlot to silvopasture?
That's really going to depend on your context, on what kind of trees you're working with. Generally, just some general rules of thumb. If you can get down to more like a 50% shade, that will start to allow some good undergrowth, some good forages. You really want to find a good forester and ideally someone who is knowledgeable about trees and about forages and livestock. And there's not a whole lot of people that are knowledgeable about all of those things. CJ Morgan, who's on the comments section, he would be a great one to reach out to if you want to be able to chat with a forester who's very thoughtful, very knowledgeable about all of these things. And I've already told him that he needs to just offer his services to a whole lot more people.
Yeah, I see that he is answering some questions or giving some information about pig breed. So if you were curious about that, check out the chat section. And that is not going to be in the recording. So if you see anything on there that you really want to remember for later, go ahead and save that when you see it. Because that does not show up on our YouTube. Um, okay, let's see. Uh how about briar mass such as black raspberries and
Mm.
chokeberries?
Good question. I don't know as much of those. I haven't seen them really mentioned. I'm sure hogs would make use of them. It's probably going to be a little bit more annoying for them to actually get access to them because of all the briars and whatnot. But I'm sure that there would be some use cases for those. But it's just going to be a lot easier to manage to bring like trees and that kind of thing. They're just going to drop it, and then you don't have to worry about briars and all those thick things. But actually, even better for poultry, if people are interested in poultry, um, thickets, chokeberries, all great options that are going to provide them with cover because poultry love and value cover a lot, and that's something that hogs just don't need near as much.
We've got a suggestion here in the Q&A that's saying, can I suggest the University of Missouri Center for Agroforestry is a good resource on these
Mhm.
topics. So
Yeah.
that's something that I'll make sure to include in that follow-up email as
Mhm.
well. Um, let's see. Oh, this is a good question. Are you picking and feeding, or are you just letting the fruit drop in these systems?
I mean, I pick and feed them to the chickens that I have in my little chicken yard, but that's because I don't have enough mulberry trees in their chicken yard yet. But no, for to do this at scale, you need the animals to do the work themselves.
Yeah.
That's the only way to really make this successful. I do it just because I enjoy doing it and I enjoy playing around with things and learning and seeing what they go for, what they don't go for, all of those things. Um, but no, the only way to do this really at scale is to have the livestock pick up their own food.
Okay, and then one last question. In looking at some of the photos on your website, I see that some of the tree tubes have barbed wire around them. Did that work in keeping the cattle from rubbing on them?
Yeah, they're nice pictures, but we don't really recommend the system. We've had some people have success with it. We've had other people that really haven't had success with it. I think the better, more foolproof way is to use electric fencing. That will teach cattle and other livestock much better than the barbed wire because even the barbed wire like they won't tend to rub as hard, but they like to find a little spot on the barb that they can rub and scratch something on them. So or they can get their tail caught up in the barbed wire. So it's not really something that we recommend to folks.
All right. Thank you for answering all of those great questions. Um,
Absolutely.
we'll just wrap up here. A couple housekeeping items to share before we sign off today. A recording of this webinar and the slides will be available next week. Like I said earlier, normally we'd get this out to you tomorrow, but Sam is away on business, so that's going to take a little longer than normal. We're taking a break for a couple of weeks, but make sure to join us on October 28th for Getting Your Farm Funded, Understanding Facts Fund to Farmer Grants in 2025. We'll send out the links to that and any of the upcoming webinars and other opportunities for farmers in our follow-up email. Thanks so much, Austin. It's been such a pleasure to have you. And thanks to everyone who joined us and for your all of your great discussion in the chat and all your great questions. So yeah,
You're
that's
very
it.
welcome.
Yes.
Thank you for having me.
Have a great rest of your day.
We'll see ya.